All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to our second conversation in the remote work series. My name's Ken Khan. I am the Director of Partnerships and Collaboration with Eye to Eye Technologies, where we help people with video communications. As always, I'm here with my friend and colleague, the person you're really here to see and hear.
I'm Roxanne Glauser. I'm Director of Marketing and Learning with i2i Technologies, and so excited to continue our conversation about remote work. Now, in our first video, we looked at the definition of remote work, hybrid, virtual, just to give us a baseline of understanding. And then we went through some of the current stats on remote work, just kind of, talking about things we'd noticed, some things that we'd read about. And then we looked at the scope and the sequence of what we would be talking about in this full series. There are going to be 10 conversations. And so that's, if you missed that video, I'm going to put a link to it in the description of this one. So if you'd like to go back and kind of check out those definitions and see where we're going, we invite you to do that. So I know, Ken, you are going to kick us off with our topic today, the perspective shift of remote work.
Yeah, we'll start off here with some chatting about perspective shift related to work and remote work specifically. And then we have five tips with some sub tips to those to share with you on remote work. Let's start with this I guess quote that I pulled out of one of the resources that we researched and just kind of get some thoughts on that. It says, "We must stop thinking, should an employee in a particular role be working on site or remotely, and start thinking, what type of work or tasks do employees do in their role, and where can those tasks be done most productively? Where is now a strategy on the best place to do tasks?" Thoughts on that?
I really, really like that because it used to be the main way to evaluate someone's work is like the attendance policy. Like, are you there sitting in your chair? And I think with the advent of technologies that enable us to be productive wherever we are, as we get into this conversation, I think we're maybe learning some incorrect things or wrong lessons from the pandemic to where we're still, it feels in some way we're reverting to the just on-site or remote. Like that's the conversation. And I think there's a lot more that goes into it. And I love that the where being a strategy, but also that looking at the type of work and where can that employee be most effective. So it's type of work plus who's doing that work, because there are some things that we know remote work doesn't work for everybody, right? Like if you are somebody who doesn't have purpose, kind of lack of ownership, that you need a lot of direction, then remote work might not be the best location for you to do that work. What do you think? I mean, is that
Yeah, I
resonating?
mean, to me, when I hear that too, it kind of reminds me of like somebody making a gut reaction to something versus stepping back and looking at the situation. Like instead of taking like more of a holistic approach, just being like, do we do this or this? And it's like, well, before we even look at that question, let's take a step back and what are the other things that we need to think about? Like it reminds me of our blended process approach to developing solutions for people that we partner with, where we always start with, well, what's the intention here? You know, what's your goal? Let's start there. What is it that you want to do? What is it that you do here? What are your objectives? Um, then we say, okay, you know, well, what kind of resources do we have available to us? You know, what are the circumstances? You know, like what are the personalities? Who are
Mm.
the people involved? What types of things, you know, like you were talking about, like what types of work do these people do? What types of um, locations are they at? How many people? And, you know, so we kind of look at all those different circumstances, and then it's like, okay, well, let's make a plan based on that, and then let's start doing it. You know, it might not be a perfect plan. It might be like, there's still a bunch of things that we don't know and we're not sure about. Let's just start doing it and figuring it out instead of just like right from the get go, be like, no, everybody's back in the office, or no, everybody's remote, or it's like, well, let's step back and think about this first before we start answering questions that we're not sure of all the context behind.
Yeah, and I get there are places where, there's no time for nuance or there's no appetite for nuance or the culture is not built around that. But I think successful organizations that do take into account to get the best person doing the job and to give them, the tools they need. And if you think of your environment as one of your tools, because I can remember times where when we had one of, my first jobs where it was fully in person. Well, you'd get there, you had to be there by a certain time, but then everybody would mill around for the first 30 minutes of the day getting coffee. And then at 10 o'clock, the smokers got a 15-minute smoke break. And so they would do that. And then it would be noon, which is time for lunch, and everybody would be gone for an hour, but it really would take an hour and 15 minutes. You get back, 3 o'clock is smoke break, and to where what was most important was were you present within the time frame?
And
And
did
then,
you look appropriate? Like I
oh
also
my
remember,
gosh, yes, yes,
yeah,
yes, yes.
yeah, it's like you had a certain, dress code, you
Mhm.
know, some of it kind of you know, said and some of it kind of implied.
It seemed like it was so much of work was performative. Did you look a certain way? Did you act a certain way? Were you there at a certain time? And what I was hearing as you were describing that quote was let's shift to what are the outcomes? What do we need to get done? What's the team we need to do that? And how can we get them doing that as productively as possible, as quickly as possible? And in some cases, it will be at different locations, and that's fine. Can you get your work done?
Yeah, well, and you mentioned the pandemic too. You would think, like pre-pandemic, it would be hard. It was harder to make a case for remote work because there was a lot of like, that's not going to work for us. We're not going to be able to do that. Here's why that doesn't work. Here's why we need everybody here to be able to be a successful company or to be a successful organization. But with the pandemic happening and everybody being forced, everybody that possibly could possibly do it was doing remote work. And we're not talking like it was 2 weeks, like we're talking months, in a lot of cases years of people being fully remote because of the circumstances, right? So we got to test all those theories. And what did we find? We found, oh, a lot of these things can be done remotely. A lot of these things do work better in this situation. And so you would think coming out of it, we could say, okay, what are the things that worked well when we were in the office? What are the things that didn't? Like you talked about the smoke break, like all those interruptions. It's like, how can we like take the best of both of those worlds and now apply it going forward instead of like, no, let's get back to doing it how we did it back in the good old days of 2019 and before. It's like, yeah, no, let's look at what's the best way to do this. And you had mentioned too that that there's that line about remote work doesn't work for people with lack of purpose or ownership. And it's like, yeah, I agree with that statement, but at the same time, like it doesn't need to say remote. Work doesn't work for people who lack purpose or sense of ownership. So it's like, don't try to be like, oh, it's the remote work that needs It's like it's work in general. I've seen people. You talked about the performative. Like, does it look like you're working? And
Mhm.
there's some people that are very good at that. And so when it comes to the remote work where people don't have eyes on you all the time, it's a struggle for those people because they don't have the theater
Mhm.
to
Oh, yeah.
make it look like, oh man, yeah, I'm really working over here. And it's like, no, I haven't seen any, I don't, what's the evidence? There's no evidence of you working.
Mhm. Yeah. I worked with a person, very prompt, present a lot, but would just look flustered and walk through Cubbyland with a piece of paper like they were busy and on an important mission to find an answer to something. Like, and no one wanted to be on the team with this person, and we knew we're like, oh gosh, because it was all performative. It was like this little game of like, how do you, so I think the focus on what is the work? How do you evaluate the work instead of just being like, oh, it can only be here or there. I think that's, yeah, definitely. Because you can do terrible work in person. You can do terrible work remotely. You can goof off in person. You can goof off remotely.
Right, right,
It's
right.
the person, not the location, in my
Yeah, I mean, I think if we're all being honest, we could say there's good things and bad things about both scenarios. And somebody that's smart is going to say, okay, well, how can we do take the best of both
opinion.
and apply those in our situation based on what we want to do, what kind of resources we have, what our circumstances are, and we do some things and we continue to evaluate and how do we want to tweak this? What's working? What's not working? What's working right now might not work well later. I think those are the people that are going to see success going forward.
Well, and I like the frame of instead of focusing so much on the location, which we can figure out the location, focus on what are the tasks and how do we give that employee the tools so that they can be the most productive instead of just that blanket be here or be there.
All right. Well, so do we want to go ahead and get into some of our tips?
Yeah, let's do that.